The day I was digging through trash, a woman in a designer suit called my name. She didn't know it yet, but she was about to hand me back my life, and $47 million I never knew was mine. I'm Sophia Hartfield, 32 years old, and at that moment, I was elbow deep in a dumpster behind a foreclosed mansion. The air smelled of rotting upholstery and rain-soaked cardboard. My hands were black with grime, my jeans ripped at the knees, and my dignity, whatever was left of it, hung by a thread. I wasn't looking for food, I was looking for potential. A discarded chair leg, a lamp base, a mirror frame, anything I could clean, restore, and sell online for enough to cover another week of my storage unit rent. That's when I heard it. "Excuse me, are you Sophia Hartfield?" The voice didn't belong here. It was crisp, polite, layered with the kind of authority that came from people who never needed to count coins before buying coffee. I froze, clutching the wooden chair leg like a weapon, until I turned and saw her, a woman in a navy suit, perfectly pressed, holding an envelope embossed with gold. I blinked, disbelieving. "If you're here to repo something, this chair leg is literally all I own." She smiled faintly. "My name is Victoria Chen. I'm an attorney representing the estate of Mr. Theodore Hartfield." The name hit me like a ghost. My uncle, the man who raised me after my parents died, the man who'd cut me off 10 years ago when I married Richard. My breath caught. "Uncle Theodore? I'm sorry to inform you that he passed away 6 weeks ago." The world tilted, Theodore gone, and me, standing here in the rain like a failure he'd always feared I'd become. Why are you looking for me?" She opened her folder, revealing documents that looked far too official for this setting. "Because you are his sole heir." Ah. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. "Heir?" I repeated, almost laughing. "You must be joking. He disowned me." Victoria met my eyes calmly. "Mr. Hartfield never removed you from his will. You've inherited his entire estate, valued at approximately $47 million. $47 million. The words didn't land, they just hung in the air like smoke. I leaned against the dumpster, feeling dizzy. "You must have the wrong Sophia. I live in a storage unit and sell broken furniture. My ex-husband took everything." Victoria's voice softened. "Theodore made it clear you were to be found immediately after his passing. He left instructions. There's also a condition attached to the inheritance. We can discuss it somewhere more comfortable." I looked down at my mud-stained jeans, at my trembling hands. "I'm not exactly Mercedes ready." "The car can handle dust," she said simply. I wanted to laugh, but all that came out was a shaky breath. My legs moved on autopilot, following her toward the black Mercedes idling at the curb. I slid into the leather seat, feeling like an intruder in my own life. As the city blurred past, Victoria spoke, her tone professional but kind. "Your uncle left you his Manhattan brownstone, his investment portfolio, several properties, and controlling shares in Hartfield Architecture, his firm." I stared at her. "You mean his company? The one he built from nothing?" "Yes. He named you successor. There's one stipulation: you must assume the role of CEO within 30 days and hold it for at least a year. If you decline, the entire estate goes to the American Institute of Architects." I laughed then, hollow and disbelieving. "I haven't worked a day as an architect. Richard thought my degree was a cute hobby. I don't even have a current license." Victoria turned slightly. "Mr. Hartfield hoped this would give you a reason to return to architecture. His exact words were, 'Sophia will remember who she is when she's forced to build again.'" Something in my chest cracked open. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt the faintest ember of who I used to be, the girl who once sketched blueprints in cafe notebooks, who believed design could change lives. Victoria handed me a folder. "This contains initial documents and photographs of the estate." I flipped it open. There it was, the mansion from Architectural Digest, the Hartfield estate, stone and glass fused in perfect harmony. I remembered sitting beside Theodore when I was 15, tracing his blueprints while he told me, "Architecture is humanity, written in steel and light." I'd forgotten that until now. I stared at the photo until my eyes blurred. He kept me in his will even after I shut him out. "Families are complicated," Victoria said softly. "But he believed in you until the end." We stopped at a boutique hotel overlooking the coast, the kind with marble floors and quiet hallways that smell like wealth and eucalyptus. I stood in the lobby, feeling like I'd crash-landed into someone else's story. Victoria handed me a keycard. "You'll stay here tonight. Tomorrow morning we fly to New York to meet the firm's board. You have 29 days to decide whether to accept." I looked at her, then at the garbage bag holding all my possessions. "Trust me," I said with a faint smile. "Packing light won't be a problem." The suite was so immaculate it made me uncomfortable. I showered for nearly an hour, scrubbing away layers of dirt and failure until my skin burned. When I caught my reflection afterward, I barely recognized the woman staring back, hollow cheeks, tired eyes, but something else flickering there. Determination. I sat on the bed, wrapped in a towel, and whispered to the empty room. "You did it, Uncle. You found a way to make me face myself." That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed everything. Richard's smirk when he signed the divorce papers, his final words, "Good luck finding someone who wants damaged goods." He'd taken the house, the car, the savings. I'd walked away with a suitcase and my degree collecting dust. For months, I survived on pride and scraps. Yet somehow, sitting here in a 5-star room, I realized I'd survived, barely, but still standing. My phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "Victoria, car picks you up at 8 a.m. Bring everything you own. You won't be coming back." I laughed quietly. "Good," I whispered. "There's nothing here worth returning to." I opened the folder again, tracing the photo of the brownstone with my fingertips. The lines, the curves, it was more than architecture. It was my uncle's last lesson, written in glass and stone. No matter how far you fall, you can rebuild. As dawn broke, painting the walls gold, I packed my one suitcase and slipped my old architecture notebooks inside. The pages smelled like pencil, graphite, and forgotten dreams. Tomorrow I'd fly to New York. Tomorrow I'd face a company that thought I didn't belong. But tonight, I sat in silence, whispering to the memory of a man who'd never stopped believing in me. "Uncle Theodore, I'm coming home." The morning came dressed like a verdict, quiet, pale, inevitable. I woke before the alarm and watched light seep under the blackout curtains, the faint thrum of the hotel's HVAC, a steady metronome against my heartbeat. I brewed the complimentary coffee like it might decide my fate, then stood at the window in the hotel robe, steam rising to fog the glass while seagulls traced gray loops over the parking lot. At 7:57, I wheeled my one suitcase, scuffed, stubborn, and honest, down to the lobby. My garbage bag of inventory swung against my leg. A lamp base, 2 frames, a brass finial. I'd convinced myself could be valuable if I polished hard enough. People watched me the way you glance at a shadow there, present, not quite welcome. Then the black sedan slid to the curb like a period at the end of a long sentence. Victoria stepped out, unhurried and precise. "Good morning, Miss Hartfield. Ready?" "As I'll ever be." My voice surprised me, less tremor, more steel. The car smelled like cedar and something citrus. I placed the garbage bag on my lap and caught Victoria's brief flicker of amusement. Not mockery, something closer to respect. "We have a 90-minute flight, then straight to the estate to change before the board meeting," she said, scanning her phone. "I've arranged temporary credentials. Security will treat you as CEO, because you are." "I haven't earned it yet," I said. "You inherited responsibility," she corrected gently. "Earning is what happens next." We rode in silence, the highway unspooling in clean lines. Somewhere between mile markers and morning talk radio, a memory surfaced, uninvited 15-year-old me riding beside Uncle Theodore in his pickup, my backpack full of math, homework, and drafting paper. He drummed the steering wheel to an old jazz track and said, almost offhandedly, "Design isn't about what a building looks like. It's about what a building does to people who enter it." At the time, I'd nodded like I understood. Today, the sentence cracked open in me like a seed. At the small regional airport, Victoria escorted me past the places I used to wait, check-in counters, slow lines, fluorescent sighs straight onto the tarmac, where a compact jet waited, sleek and impossible. I hesitated at the stairs, palms slick, then climbed. Inside, everything was quiet assurance. White leather seats, a table set with bottled water, and a tidy tray of fruit. I folded into a seat, suddenly aware of my thrift store sneakers squeaking on polished floor. "Before we take off, we should review the conditions," Victoria said, buckling in. You must assume the role of CEO of Hartfield Architecture within 30 days of legal notification. Yesterday was day 1. You must maintain the position for at least 1 year. You may delegate design approval and operations, but you retain final executive authority. If you resign or are removed for cause, the estate transfers to the American Institute of Architects. Removed for cause? I repeated. So the board can? They can't remove you without legal grounds, she said. There will be resistance. Theodore anticipated it. Of course he did, I murmured, squeezing the armrest as the jet rolled forward. He never set a table without also setting a challenge. Victoria's mouth softened. He believed you were equal to both. The jet lifted with a steady push that pressed my spine into the seat. Land fell away, knitted neighborhoods, bright threads of highway, a quilt of fields, and the sky opened. I felt strangely calm. The way you become when you've already lost everything and the worst thing has already happened. After that, the unknown becomes almost luxurious. Victoria slid a stack of papers and a tablet onto the table. A primer on Hartfield's active projects. Museums in Doha and Buenos Aires. A mixed-use development in Seattle. A hospital modernization in Ohio. The board consists of 8 members, 3 legacy partners, 2 financial appointees, 2 external advisors, and 1 employee-elected representative. The most influential is Richard Carmichael. The one who thinks Theodore wasn't thinking clearly, I said, recalling her tone yesterday. Her eyebrows lifted. You do remember. I remember everything, I said, surprising myself again. I just haven't used it. She nodded. There's also Jacob Sterling, senior partner. He joined 12 years ago, rose quickly. Your uncle respected him. Respected, I repeated, rolling the word on my tongue like a coin. Past tense. I'm going to have to be present tense. We leveled off. The cabin quieted into a hush that felt like a chapel, air hissing softly, metal singing its distant song. Through the window, the world was raw blue and blind white. I could almost see my fear evaporating. I opened the project docket. Plans, elevations, sun studies, green roof diagrams. It was like touching a language I'd once been fluent in, and now was remembering conjugation mid-sentence. My brain woke up, stretching cat-like from a long sleep. I traced a slope on a museum roofline with my finger, noting where wind patterns might punish an unguarded edge. I scribbled in the margin of the tablet with the stylus instincts I hadn't dulled, only hidden. Does it feel familiar? Victoria asked, watching without hovering. Like a melody I forgot I knew, I said. The notes are the same. I'm the one who changed. Her gaze flicked to my battered notebook poking from the top of my suitcase. Those are yours? 10 years of them, I said. Drawings I made at night while Richard slept. Designs I never pitched because dinner had to be perfect. He called them my little hobby. Victoria's face did something it hadn't done yet, cracked with visible anger. Abuse prefers its victims quiet, she said, controlled. It is efficient that you are not. I laughed, abrupt and soft. Efficient, that's a new word for me. She glanced at the window, then back. One more thing. The press may pay attention. Architectural Digest adored Theodore. They will find you. Let them, I said. I'd rather stand in the light and stop pretending I don't exist. For a while, we read in companionable silence. The fruit tray sat untouched between us, a small abundance I wasn't brave enough to claim yet. I made notes, questions for the board, a list of names I didn't recognize, a starred reminder to ask about employee pay equity, because if I was going to stand in this role, I wanted to start where it mattered. People. I drifted sideways into memory without meaning to, as if turbulence shook loose a decade. Senior year studio review, the jury crowded around my sustainable community center. One professor said, ambitious. Another said, naive. Theodore stood at the back, arms crossed, eyes lit. Afterward, he wrapped me in a fierce hug and said, be both. Be ambitious enough to be called naive. The world tightens around cynical men and then wonders where the light went. The gallery where Richard first introduced himself. He wore confidence like cologne. Your line work is meticulous, he said, tilting his head at my renderings. Dinner to celebrate? I said yes because I was good at yes then. He made me feel chosen until chosen turned into owned. The phone call where Theodore said he wouldn't attend my wedding. You're walking into a cage, Sophia. And me, sharp with the arrogance of being young and adored. You're jealous I'm choosing my own path. We never spoke again. Pride is a door with a heavy hinge. Sometimes you only realize it when it slams on your fingers. I came back to the cabin and found Victoria watching me carefully, not intrusively. Grief makes ghosts, she said, as if I'd spoken aloud. But so does love. The plane began its slow descent. Clouds peeled back, and New York revealed itself not as a skyline but as an argument, angles debating with light, glass insisting against gravity. I'd never been. Richard didn't like cities. They had too many doors he couldn't lock. As we banked toward the runway, something clicked into place in my mind, not bravado, not denial. Choice. I thought about the condition on the will, 1 year as CEO, or lose everything. It wasn't a punishment, it was a blueprint. Build for a year, it said, and remember who you are. I turned to Victoria. Tell me what happens if I say yes right now. She didn't smile, exactly. Her face warmed by degrees. Then we go straight to the estate. You change into something that says, capable, and we walk into that boardroom like we own the air. You will introduce yourself as CEO. You will listen more than you speak for the first 10 minutes, then speak with absolute clarity for the next 5. We will be outnumbered but not outpowered. And if I say no? Then I drive you to a different hotel and file a notice to transfer everything to the Institute, she said, and for the first time there was a crack in her calm. Not pressure, faith. But I don't think we're taking that drive. I looked back out at the city, at the deliberate geometry of bridges, the audacity of towers, the way water refused to be tamed and was courted anyway. I saw a map of my own life, the spans I'd built between ruin and morning, the tensile strength of quiet choices, the stubborn river of myself no one had managed to bottle. Yes, I said. The word landed clean. I accept the role of CEO. Good, Victoria said, almost under her breath, as if confirming something she'd already known. She tapped a message to someone named J. Sterling, arriving in 40, proceed as discussed. The wheels kissed the runway, the engines sighed, and I exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. The driver met us plainside and whisked us through a private terminal that smelled like new tile and money. Outside, New York attacked my senses. Horns layered over pigeons over a street saxophone riff, steam lifting from a manhole like the city was exhaling its own story, the air a metallic cocktail of rain, coffee, and ambition. We shot through neighborhoods graffiti, brownstones, sudden pockets of trees. Every window was a soft square of mystery. Every fire escape looked like punctuation. I pressed my forehead to the glass like a kid. We'll stop at the estate first, Victoria said. There are clothes in your size in the master suite. Your uncle was, how shall I say, anticipatory. He always set the table for the person you could become, I murmured. Victoria turned that into a nod, filing it away like it might matter later. 2 o'clock with the board. They'll test you. They'll assume your silence is ignorance. Use it as reconnaissance. Ask one surgical question that reveals you've read everything, and one that reveals how you think. Then put the notebooks on the table. The notebooks? I asked, startled. The ones you've kept for 10 years, she said simply. Bring the life they tried to bury. I swallowed. There are moments the future feels like glass, transparent, brittle, and reflecting you back at yourself. This was one of them. I tightened my grip on the strap of my suitcase. My palm didn't sweat. We turned onto a tree-lined block tucked as if the city had decided to keep a secret. Ahead, half shadow and all intention, rose a brownstone with a Victorian face and modern bones, sunlight caught on discrete solar tiles, ivy trained like calligraphy up wrought iron, panes so clear the sky seemed to lean in. Welcome home, Victoria said. But that was part 3's promise. For now, I touched the window, felt the vibration of the engine, and steadied myself for the meeting where I would be weighed, doubted, measured, and revealed. I inhaled, tasting rain. I'm ready, I said. The drive from the airport to the Hartfield estate felt like being slowly pulled through time, each block older, quieter, more deliberate. The glass towers thinned out, replaced by trees whose leaves glittered with rain. The streets narrowed into a hushed row of brownstones with wrought iron fences and steps scrubbed by someone who cared. And there it was. The Hartfield estate. It looked almost alive. 5 stories of brick and glass, vines tracing up the facade like veins carrying memory. The rain had stopped, but droplets still clung to the iron gate, reflecting the city lights. For a long moment, I just stood on the sidewalk, suitcase in one hand, my entire past compressed into the other. Victoria's voice was soft. He designed it to evolve, you know. Each generation was supposed to leave their mark. My uncle built this? I whispered, still stunned. Every inch, it was his masterpiece. Now it's yours. That sentence should have felt triumphant. Instead, it felt like being handed the weight of a mountain. A woman in her 60s opened the heavy oak door before we could knock. She had kind eyes and a linen apron dusted with flour. "Miss Hartfield?" she asked, smiling as if she already knew the answer. "Welcome home." Her voice triggered something, a faint echo from another life. The smell of lemon cake, a gentle hand on my shoulder after my parents' funeral. "Margaret?" I breathed. Her eyes filled with tears. "Oh, my dear girl, look at you. The last time I saw you, you were 15 and taller than the grief you carried." She pulled me into a hug that smelled of soap and cinnamon. And just like that, for the first time in years, I felt safe. Victoria stepped inside. "Margaret, thank you for preparing the rooms." "Of course, Miss Chen." Mr. Hartfield left detailed instructions. "Of course he did," I murmured, smiling through tears. The foyer opened into a world I'd only ever seen in glossy magazines. Modern art hung beside intricate crown molding, marble floors polished to a soft glow, staircases spiraling like sculpture. It wasn't just a house. It was an argument made of stone that innovation and history didn't have to compete. As I walked through, I could almost hear my uncle's voice echoing. "Architecture should breathe, Sophia. It should tell you where you are and who you might become." Margaret led us upward, her steps slow and sure. "Your uncle's suite is on the 4th floor," she said. "But he had the 5th converted for you, years ago. He called it the return studio." I froze. "Years ago? We weren't even speaking." Margaret's smile was bittersweet. "He said you'd come back eventually. He wanted to make sure the space was ready when you did." The 5th floor door creaked open into light. Wide skylights poured sunshine onto massive drafting tables, covered in pristine tools, T-squares, compasses, pens. There were digital screens too, a full setup of high-end architecture software, and along one wall drawers upon drawers labeled with materials and samples. But what undid me wasn't the equipment, it was the corkboard. Pinned to it, yellowed with time, was my college exhibition sketch, the Sustainable Community Center design that had won first prize my senior year. My handwriting still scrawled across the corner. "Someday, I'll build this." I covered my mouth, the air leaving my lungs in one shuddering sound. "He kept it." Margaret stepped closer, eyes misting. "Your uncle believed your gift was too rare to stay buried forever," he said. "Sophia's light might dim, but it will never go out." I traced the faded lines with trembling fingers. The graphite smudged slightly under my touch. 10 years of silence. And yet here, he'd been keeping vigil for me. Victoria lingered by the door. "He didn't just build a studio, Sophia. He built a place for your rebirth." That word rebirth lodged deep in my chest. I walked to the wide window overlooking Manhattan. The city below shimmered, all motion and noise, but up here was stillness. Reflection. I imagined Theodore pacing here years ago, looking out that same window, sketching designs with the same energy that had once inspired me. I could almost feel him. "Why me?" I whispered under my breath. "After everything I did? After walking away?" Margaret's voice came softly behind me. "Because he loved you, and love doesn't keep score, it keeps hope." That night, I wandered the estate long after Victoria left. Every corner told a story. A photograph of Theodore with Frank Gehry, old blueprints rolled up in leather tubes, books with notes in the margins. Sustainability is the morality of modern design. In the kitchen, Margaret had left me a plate of roast chicken and bread. I hadn't had a home-cooked meal in months. I ate in silence, each bite an act of remembering what it felt like to be cared for. Later, in the guest suite, I opened my suitcase. The contrast between my folded thrift clothes and the silk sheets made me laugh quietly. The sound startled me. I hadn't heard myself laugh in so long. When I finally lay down, exhaustion hit all at once. My body wanted sleep, but my mind wandered to the meeting ahead. Tomorrow, I'd walk into a boardroom full of people expecting me to fail. I could already hear their polite skepticism. She's never worked a day in this field. She's Theodore's charity case. They didn't know me. Not yet. I got up, turned on the desk lamp, and opened one of my old notebooks. The pages were filled with sketches drawn in secret during my marriage, bridges, museums, community parks, all dreamed in silence. I ran a hand over them, whispering, "You wanted me to build again, Uncle. I will." The lamp's glow hit the silver corner of a small frame sitting beside the bed, a picture of 15-year-old me standing beside Theodore, holding a blueprint bigger than I was. In the photo, his hand rested on my shoulder, pride unmistakable. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a failure. I felt like an architect one rebuilding her own foundation. As I drifted toward sleep, thunder rolled distantly across the city, the sound deep and reassuring, like a heartbeat. I thought of what Victoria had said, that the firm's board would test me. Good. Let them. I'd been tested long before any of them knew my name. Tomorrow, they would see the woman they thought the world had broken, and she would show them what happens when you build again from ruins. The next morning smelled of rain and something electric, like the world knew a reckoning was coming. I woke before dawn, nerves pacing in my stomach like restless birds. Outside my window, Manhattan was still half asleep, lights blinking against the gray. Somewhere down there, people were already building lives, making choices, breaking hearts. And today, I was about to reclaim mine. When I walked into the kitchen, Margaret was already up, pouring coffee into a porcelain cup I recognized. Theodore's favorite, the one etched with the outline of the Hartfield estate. "I remember that mug," I said. She smiled. "He drank from it every morning, even after you left. Said it reminded him of what he built for himself and for you." I took the cup, holding it like a fragile inheritance. Did he really believe I'd come back? Margaret's eyes softened. He never doubted it. He just didn't know how many storms you'd have to walk through first. By 8:30, I was dressed. The navy blue suit Victoria had arranged fit perfectly, though I hadn't given her my measurements. "He knew your size," she'd said simply. "He kept it updated." I looked in the mirror, clean lines, hair swept back, face still pale but no longer hollow. For months I'd been invisible. Now I looked like someone who could command a room. Victoria arrived exactly on time, her phone in one hand, her confidence in the other. "The board meeting's at 10. We'll review the plan in the car." As we rode through the city, she spoke like a strategist before battle. "They'll underestimate you. Use that." Carmichael leads the resistance. He's traditional, believes architecture is a man's world. The others orbit his opinion but crave stability. Show them strength and vision, and they'll follow. "Vision," I repeated, watching skyscrapers slice the sky outside the window. "That I can do." She smiled. "Good, because they'll test you immediately." The Hartfield Architecture headquarters sat like a cathedral of glass and steel in Midtown. The moment I stepped through the revolving door, heads turned. Conversations slowed. Some recognized me from the photos of Theodore's funeral announcement, others from whispered gossip. Victoria leaned toward me. "Remember, silence is not weakness, it's calculation." We entered the elevator. The mirrored walls reflected two versions of me, who I'd been and who I was becoming. When the doors opened on the 32nd floor, I stepped out as the latter. The boardroom was vast floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, a polished walnut table stretching like a runway. 8 people sat waiting. Men in tailored suits, 2 women in neutral tones, and 1 empty seat at the far end mine. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria began smoothly, "this is Miss Sophia Hartfield, Theodore Hartfield's great niece and designated successor." No one applauded. They just stared. The man at the head of the table, silver hair, sharp eyes, expensive watch, leaned back. "Carmichael. With respect, Miss Chen, this firm requires experienced leadership. Miss Hartfield has never managed a team, let alone a global architecture company. Surely this isn't what Theodore intended." I smiled, sitting slowly, deliberately. Actually, Mr. Carmichael, it's exactly what he intended. He was many things eccentric, visionary, but never careless. If he chose me, it was because he saw something in me you haven't yet. His jaw twitched. Which is? Potential. Untested doesn't mean unqualified. He snorted softly. You've never even designed a building. Not for profit, I said, pulling a worn notebook from my bag. But I've spent 10 years designing in silence. Because while some of you were presenting at conferences, I was married to a man who thought ambition was a threat. So I created quietly, built quietly, learned quietly. I didn't stop being an architect. I just stopped being seen as one. I slid the notebook across the table. Inside were hand-drawn blueprints, intricate elevations, sustainable housing concepts, 10 years of work hidden from the world. The room leaned forward as pages turned. A younger woman on the board, dark curls, glasses, looked up, eyes bright. These are good, really good. Thank you, I said. They're not polished, they're real. That's how design begins, raw and imperfect. My uncle believed brilliance wasn't born fully formed. He was right. Carmichael flipped through a few pages, unimpressed. Even if your designs are decent, this isn't a school project. Running a firm means clients, deadlines, budgets, business acumen. Then I'll rely on those who have it, I said calmly. I'm not here to pretend I know everything. I'm here to learn from the best, lead with integrity, and honor Theodore's legacy by evolving it. Victoria opened her briefcase and handed out new contracts. Those who wish to remain under Miss Hartfield's leadership will sign updated terms, acknowledging her as CEO. Those who prefer to depart may collect severance by end of day. Carmichael's pen froze midair. That's coercion. It's choice, I said. The same kind my uncle gave me when he left this company in my hands. The silence that followed was thick enough to taste. Then, a man's voice, steady, low, cut through it. I'll stay. I turned. Tall, late 30s, sleeves rolled up slightly despite the formal setting. Dark hair with a streak of silver, intelligent eyes that studied me not as a threat, but as a question he already knew the answer to. Jacob Sterling, he said, extending his hand. Senior partner. I worked with your uncle for 12 years. His name hit me. The Jacob Sterling, the architect behind the Seattle Public Library expansion I'd studied in college. You designed the biophilic atrium, I said before I could stop myself. The use of natural light was revolutionary. His eyebrows rose, a flicker of surprise breaking through professionalism. You know my work. I know everyone's work, I said softly. I might not have practiced, but I never stopped studying. Something shifted in the air, respect, maybe. Or recognition. Well then, Jacob said, turning to the room. Looks like Theodore didn't pick a charity case after all. A few board members exchanged glances. Even Carmichael seemed momentarily off balance. The meeting continued for another hour. Contracts, logistics, questions about leadership strategy. I answered honestly, refusing to bluff. When I didn't know something, I said so. When I did, I spoke with the certainty of someone who had lost everything and learned how little she had left to fear. By the end, 5 of the 8 members signed the new agreements. Carmichael didn't. Neither did his 2 allies. But that didn't matter. I had control, and I had momentum. As the room emptied, Jacob lingered by the window, hands in pockets. That was well played, he said. You made enemies of half the board, but the half that matters respects you. I exhaled, the adrenaline finally catching up. Did I make an enemy of you? He smiled, small, genuine. No. Your uncle told me about you, you know. Said you'd been buried alive for years. And when you finally broke through, you'd be unstoppable. I laughed softly. He was always dramatic. Maybe, Jacob said. But I think he was right. Outside, the city glittered through the glass, sunlight breaking over skyscrapers like a promise. I looked down at the streets, chaotic, alive, endless, and thought, he gave me a second chance, but I'm the one who has to build it. Thank you, Jacob, I said quietly, for believing me before I've proven anything. He nodded once, eyes steady. You just did. That night, I stood alone in Theodore's old office, the lights dim, the scent of cedar and graphite still lingering in the air. His drafting table sat in one corner, covered in dust and memory. I placed my notebook beside his blueprints and whispered, "I did it, Uncle." I walked in without apology. Somewhere in the silence, it felt like the room exhaled with me. Tomorrow, I would begin learning everything I'd missed. But tonight I allowed myself one small, quiet victory. The first week at Hartfield Architecture was a blur of meetings, names, and rediscovered purpose. My days began before sunrise and ended long after the city lights dimmed. I studied Theodore's old project files at night, tracing the language of his lines like poetry grace wrapped in precision. The more I read, the more I realized he hadn't just built buildings, he'd built beliefs. Jacob proved indispensable. He guided me through the chaos with quiet efficiency, explaining budgets, introducing clients, and gently translating the board's coded power plays into plain English. Where others tested me, he advised. Where others doubted me, he listened. One evening, he found me standing over a model of the Seattle Museum, Theodore's last completed masterpiece, my reflection fractured in the glass case. "You've been here for hours," Jacob said. "You'll burn out before the week ends." I smiled faintly. "You sound like him." "Your uncle?" He used to say, "Architecture demands everything, but if you give it too much, it takes your soul." Jacob leaned beside me. He wasn't wrong, but I think the trick is learning to give it meaning instead of everything. His words lingered as I returned to the estate that night. For the first time in years, I wanted to dream again. The next morning, Margaret met me at the door, her expression hesitant but warm. "There's something you should see, dear. I found it while cleaning your uncle's study." She handed me a small, weathered envelope, my name written across the front in familiar handwriting. "Sophia." My throat tightened. "When did he write this?" "2 months before he passed," she said quietly. "He must have known you'd come eventually." I took the envelope upstairs to the 5th-floor studio. Sunlight poured through the skylight, landing directly on the drafting table, as if the universe wanted to witness this moment. I broke the seal, and the scent of old paper filled the room. "My dearest Sophia, if you are reading this, it means I'm gone and that you've finally found your way home. I wish I could have been braver in life, braver to reach out, braver to say I missed you. But pride is a stubborn architect. It builds walls where doors should be. You were always meant for this. I never doubted your brilliance, only your willingness to see it in yourself. I hope by now you've learned that no man, no heartbreak, no failure can erase the foundation of who you are. Go to the bottom right drawer of your cabinet. There's something there for you. Use it wisely. It's the one gift of mine that isn't perfect, and that's precisely why it matters. I am, and always have been, proud of you. Uncle Theodore." I didn't realize I was crying until the ink on the last line blurred. I folded the letter gently, pressing my forehead against the page for a long moment before walking to the filing cabinet. The bottom right drawer was locked, but a small brass key was taped underneath the table. Of course it was. He'd always thought ahead. Inside were 17 leather portfolios, each labeled with a year. The smell of graphite, dust, and aged vellum rose like memory. They weren't glossy presentation materials. They were raw sketches, messy corrections, pages crossed out with frustration. Theodore's failures. He'd kept every one. In the most recent folder was another note, shorter, shakier. "These are my mistakes, my false starts, the buildings that never stood, the ideas that collapsed before they rose. I'm giving them to you because the world needs to see that brilliance isn't about perfection, it's about persistence. Share them when you're ready. Teach what failure really looks like. Love, T." I sat on the floor, surrounded by the physical history of a man's evolution. The pages were alive with fingerprints and fury and hope. It hit me that the greatest architects, the greatest people didn't rise from success. They built from rubble. The next morning, I arrived at the office early, portfolio under my arm. Jacob was already there, coffee in hand. "You're glowing," he said, half teasing. "What happened?" I held up the folder. "My uncle left me something. His mistakes." He raised a brow. "That's a gift most people don't have the courage to share." "That's exactly why I want to." I spread the sketches on the table. "I want to create a mentorship program, a fellowship. We'll take architecture students from underrepresented backgrounds, give them access to this, to real process, real failure, real growth. Paid work, not unpaid experience. They'll learn that imperfection is the first draft of genius. Jacob studied me for a long moment, something proud flickering in his expression. That's ambitious, he said finally. That's the point, I replied. My uncle taught me that if an idea doesn't scare you a little, it's not big enough. He smiled, slow and genuine. You sound like him. Later that afternoon, I presented the proposal to the board. Carmichael's lips thinned halfway through. This fellowship is philanthropy, not business, he said flatly. We don't have room for idealistic experiments. I met his gaze without flinching. Hartfield architecture was built on idealism. My uncle didn't design for money, he designed for meaning. This program will ensure that spirit lives on. One of the younger partners nodded thoughtfully. It could also attract new clients who value social innovation. The industry's shifting. Carmichael scoffed. You'll bankrupt us trying to make architecture a charity. No, I said. I'll make it human again. For once, he had no response. That evening, Jacob stopped by my office. The skyline behind him burned gold with sunset. You were incredible in there, he said. Even Carmichael had to respect it, though he'll never admit it. I smiled tiredly. He sees me as an inconvenience. He sees you as change, and change scares men like him. I leaned back, watching the city flicker to life. Do you think my uncle would have approved of what I'm trying to do? Jacob hesitated, then said softly, No, he wouldn't have approved. He would have been delighted. Something warm and unexpected rose in my chest. Thank you, I said, for believing in this. He shrugged lightly. Belief's easy when someone gives you a reason. That night, I stayed late again. The studio was quiet except for the soft hum of the city outside. I laid out Theodore's old sketches beside my own. His lines were bold, where mine were cautious, his mistakes more graceful than my triumphs. But together, they told a story, a legacy, imperfect and alive. I whispered into the stillness, I'll make you proud, Uncle, but I'll also make it mine. The rain began again, tapping softly against the glass like applause. Somewhere deep inside me, something old and heavy shifted into place, a foundation finally steady enough to build upon. The morning of the presentation dawned sharp and silver, the kind of New York day that felt like a dare. The clouds hung low, threatening rain, and the reflection of the skyline in the Hudson shimmered like unfinished glass. This was the day Hartfield Architecture would pitch its largest project in a decade, a multi-million-dollar contract for a new eco-museum in Singapore. It wasn't just business, it was legacy. It would prove whether I was capable of carrying my uncle's empire, or just a shadow wearing his name. I'd spent 2 weeks preparing, late nights sketching on tracing paper, mornings refining slides, afternoons balancing nerves with caffeine. Jacob helped refine my pitch. We debated tone, message, symbolism. He had this way of simplifying chaos, of looking at a maze and saying, There's always an exit, you just haven't walked far enough to see it yet. By 8 a.m., the conference room buzzed with quiet intensity. Assistants carried coffee trays, screens flickered to life. Carmichael was already seated, expression unreadable, flanked by his loyal allies. I caught his faint smirk and felt a prickle of warning. At 8:30 sharp, Victoria entered, followed by the clients, a delegation from the Singapore Heritage Council. They were polite, curious, impeccably dressed. I stood to greet them, my heart a steady drumbeat in my ribs. Miss Hartfield, their director said, shaking my hand. We've heard a great deal about your uncle. His legacy precedes him. Then I hope today proves it continues, I replied with a smile. Saturday. I opened my laptop, ready to begin the presentation. The screen blinked once, then froze. I tried again. Nothing. The files refused to load. A blank error message stared back at me like an accusation. My blood ran cold. Technical difficulties, I said lightly, though my fingers shook. I glanced at Jacob. His brows furrowed. He leaned toward his tablet, same result. The files were corrupted. Every render, every model, gone. Carmichael leaned back, arms crossed. Seems the presentation wasn't properly backed up. Pity. The clients whispered among themselves. I caught the flicker of disappointment in their eyes. Panic pressed at the edges of my mind, but then Theodore's voice echoed in memory. When the blueprint burns, draw it again from memory. If you designed it with truth, it never really leaves you. I straightened. We won't be needing the slides, I said suddenly. Victoria's head turned sharply, but she said nothing. I walked to the whiteboard at the front of the room, grabbed a marker, and began to draw. The sound of the pen scratching over glass filled the silence. Imagine, I began, a building that doesn't just house history, but breathes it, where each visitor experiences heritage not as something preserved behind glass but as something alive. I drew the outline of a spiraling structure, lines curling upward like the shell of a nautilus. This design is inspired by the natural geometry of growth, expansion, reflection, and renewal. Each layer represents a generation contributing to the story of the nation. I moved faster, muscle memory taking over. The board filled with elevations, sections, notes. Natural light filters from a translucent roof of recycled glass. Solar veins run beneath the floor, invisible yet vital, much like the histories we walk upon. The clients leaned forward. One of them whispered, "She's designing it in real time." I stepped back, heart pounding, marker trembling slightly in my hand. Hartfield architecture doesn't recycle old ideas. We evolve them. My uncle believed buildings could heal communities. I believe they can honor them too. A long silence stretched. Then one of the delegates began to clap. Slowly, others joined. I exhaled for what felt like the first time all morning. After the meeting, Victoria cornered me in the hallway, her voice low but fierce. "That was genius, Sophia. You just won them over without a single file." Jacob joined us, eyes gleaming. "You turned sabotage into spectacle." My stomach twisted. "It was sabotage, wasn't it?" He nodded grimly. "It checked the server. Someone deleted and corrupted your presentation files overnight using Carmichael's admin credentials." Victoria's jaw tightened. "That man's finished." "Not yet," I said quietly. "Let him underestimate me a little longer. I want him to reveal everyone he's working with." Jacob smiled faintly. "You're more Hartfield than you think." By late afternoon, the board had received the news. The Singapore Council had officially awarded the contract to Hartfield Architecture. The message came with a single line from the client's director: "Leadership that adapts under pressure deserves trust." Carmichael stormed into my office, his composure cracking. "You had no right to override protocol." "I didn't override anything," I said calmly, closing the folder in front of me. "I simply adapted, something this firm used to be known for." "You embarrassed me in front of our clients." "You embarrassed yourself by trying to sabotage your CEO." His face blanched. "You can't prove that." "Maybe not in court," I said softly, "but in this building, truth doesn't need a jury, it has witnesses." Jacob appeared in the doorway. "Security's waiting in the lobby, Richard." Carmichael's jaw clenched. He looked between us, me calm, Jacob solid, Victoria silent but deadly, and realized his empire had quietly shifted beneath him. He tried for one last jab. "You think you're saving this company? You're turning it into a social experiment." "No," I said, standing. "I'm turning it human again." He left without another word. That night, I returned to the estate exhausted but alive. The rain outside mirrored my mood, relentless, cleansing. I went straight to the fifth-floor studio. The whiteboard from the morning's pitch replayed in my mind. Those lines, drawn under pressure, had become a metaphor for everything I was rebuilding. Margaret brought me tea and paused at the door. I saw the news. "Congratulations, dear. Your uncle would have been proud." I smiled, staring out the window. He used to say architecture was the language of resilience. She tilted her head. "And what are you saying with yours?" I thought for a moment. That it's possible to start over even when you're made of ruins. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. A message from Jacob. "Jacob, they're calling you the whiteboard architect on the design blogs." "Jacob, I told you you turned disasters into blueprints." I laughed softly. "Sophia, maybe. But every blueprint starts with a mess of lines." His reply came seconds later. "Jacob, then keep drawing, Sophia. The world's finally watching." I stared at the message, the rain still whispering against the glass. For the first time, I didn't feel like a woman pretending to rebuild her life. I felt like an architect of her own story. The morning of the presentation arrived sharp and colorless, the kind of day that hums with tension before anything even begins. The skyline was washed in gray light, and the reflection of the Hudson trembled like glass. Today would decide everything. We were pitching a new eco-museum in Singapore, a contract that could define the future of Hartfield architecture, and by extension, my own. I'd spent weeks refining every slide, every angle, every sentence. Jacob had helped me polish the presentation, always calm where I was restless. He said something the night before that kept echoing in my head. Pressure doesn't break you, Sophia. It reveals your structure. By 8 a.m., the office hummed with restrained energy. Assistants arranged coffee, engineers hovered near the screens. Carmichael was already seated, his posture the perfect mix of arrogance and anticipation. He looked at me with the faintest curve of a smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. Something about it felt wrong. At 8:30, Victoria arrived with the clients from Singapore. They were poised and courteous, carrying an air of quiet authority. I greeted them, shook hands, smiled as I'd practiced, and reminded myself to breathe. When the meeting began, I opened my laptop and felt the ground shift beneath me. The file didn't load. I tried again. Still nothing. The images flickered, then vanished completely, replaced by an empty error message. My throat went dry. I glanced at Jacob. He was already checking his tablet. His expression confirmed it. The files were corrupted. Every render, every design, gone. Carmichael's smirk widened by the smallest fraction. I could have panicked. God knows I wanted to. But in that split second, something older and steadier rose inside me, the voice of my uncle, sharp and clear. When the blueprint burns, draw it again from memory. If you designed it with truth, it never really leaves you. I closed the laptop slowly and looked up at the boardroom. Actually, I said, steadying my breath, we don't need slides. Silence stretched, confused and skeptical. Then I walked to the whiteboard, grabbed a marker, and began to draw. I spoke as the lines formed. I told them to imagine a museum that didn't simply display history, but breathed it, a living structure, where light, air, and memory intertwined. I drew the curves, the glass, the movement of people through space. My hand moved faster with every word, the rhythm of creation taking over. The delegates leaned forward, murmuring to each other. One whispered that it was like watching architecture unfold in real time. When I finished, the board was covered with sketches and notes my vision laid bare, imperfect but alive. I turned to them and said, Hartfield architecture isn't about preserving the past, it's about evolving it. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then, quietly, one of the clients began to clap. Another joined. Within moments, the room filled with applause. After they left, Victoria caught my arm in the hallway, eyes wide with restrained pride. She said I'd just won over the most skeptical investors in Asia, without a single file. Jacob stood behind her, a small, knowing smile on his face. But I saw the question in his eyes, the same one echoing in mine. It wasn't an accident. IT later confirmed it. My presentation files had been accessed and altered the night before. The login came from Carmichael's account. Victoria's voice was low and firm. He's finished. Not yet, I said quietly. Let him think I'm still the underdog. I want to see who else he's pulling strings with before I cut them all. Jacob gave a short laugh. You really are a Hartfield. That afternoon, the confirmation email arrived. The Singapore Heritage Council had chosen us. Their message ended with a single line, leadership that adapts under pressure deserves trust. I was still reading it when Carmichael burst into my office, his composure unraveling. He accused me of showmanship, of embarrassing him, of running the company like a circus act. I stayed seated, calm. You sabotaged me, I told him. And you still lost. He tried to bluff. He said I couldn't prove anything. I didn't need to. Everyone had seen who he was the moment he tried to humiliate me and failed. When Jacob appeared at the doorway, Carmichael's voice faltered completely. He spat something about me turning the company into a social experiment. I stood and met his gaze. No, I said quietly, I'm turning it human again. He left without another word. That night, rain drummed against the windows of the estate like distant applause. I went to the studio on the 5th floor, the one my uncle had built for me long before I was ready to return. The air still smelled faintly of cedar and old blueprints. Margaret brought me a cup of tea and lingered by the doorway. She said she'd heard the news. I told her about the sabotage, the presentation, the outcome. She smiled sadly and said my uncle would have been proud. I looked out at the rain sliding down the glass. He used to say architecture was the language of resilience, I murmured. Margaret tilted her head. And what are you saying with yours? I thought about it for a moment before answering. That even ruins can be redesigned. Near midnight, as I sat among my sketches, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Jacob. He wrote that the design blogs were already calling me the whiteboard architect. He said I had a gift for turning disaster into design. I smiled, typing back that every blueprint starts as a mess of lines. His reply came a moment later. He told me to keep drawing, that the world was finally watching. I stared at the message for a long time, the glow of the screen reflected in the rain-streaked window. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was rebuilding someone else's legacy. I felt like I was building my own. The next morning began quietly, but something in the air felt altered, like the world had tilted just enough for me to notice. The storm had passed, leaving the city washed and sharp-edged. For the first time in months, I woke without dread. No lawsuits, no betrayals, no proving myself before a hostile board. Just stillness, and a strange, almost frightening peace. Margaret met me at breakfast, holding a small leather-bound book. I was dusting your uncle's library last night, she said, her voice hesitant, and found this behind the architectural encyclopedias. You should read it, Miss Sophia. It's about you. I turned the worn cover in my hands. Theodore's journal. The edges were frayed, the paper thin as breath. I carried it to the studio and sat by the window where light spilled across the drafting table. For a moment, I hesitated, afraid of what it might hold: regret, disappointment, or worse, indifference. But curiosity won. I opened the first page. The entries began 15 years ago. The first one was from the day he'd taken me in after my parents died. His handwriting was strong, deliberate. Sophia arrived today, grieving but curious. She watched me work for hours without saying a word. When I finally asked what she thought of the design, she said, "It looks like the building wants to breathe." I told her that's exactly what architecture should do. I think she's going to be brilliant. I read for hours. He wrote about my early drawings, about how I'd linger in his studio long after bedtime, asking endless questions. His words shifted as the years passed, from pride to worry, from affection to distance. One entry, 10 years ago, was written on my wedding day. She married Richard today. I refused to attend. Margaret says I'm cruel, but I can't watch her walk into a gilded cage. He smiles too easily, like a man rehearsing charm. She's convinced it's love. I pray I'm wrong. Another years later, cut even deeper. Sophia isn't working. Richard won't let her. My brilliant girl is fading into someone else's idea of perfect. I want to call, but Margaret insists she must find her way back on her own. God, I hope she's right. By the time I reached the final pages, my vision blurred with tears. The last entry was dated 2 months before his death. I'm dying faster than expected. Pain is considerable, but my mind is clear. I've rewritten my will one last time. Everything still goes to Sophia, but only if she leads the company for a year. She'll think it's a test of loyalty. It isn't. It's a gift of rediscovery. She's forgotten who she is, but when she remembers, the world will never be the same. All I ever wanted was for her to build again. The pen stroke faltered at the end, like the tremor of a goodbye. I pressed the pages to my chest and wept. Not quietly, but deeply, the way a wound releases when it finally stops pretending to heal itself. Theodore hadn't been angry. He hadn't abandoned me. He'd been waiting painfully, faithfully for me to come home. When the tears finally subsided, I called Jacob. My voice was unsteady when he answered. "Can you come to the estate? I found something I think you should see." He arrived an hour later. The moment he stepped into the studio, the city disappeared. I handed him the journal, unable to speak. He read in silence, turning each page slowly, reverently. When he finished, he exhaled, long and low. "He understood you," he said softly. "Better than anyone ever could." I nodded. He knew I'd have to break before I could rebuild. Jacob set the journal down carefully and leaned against the drafting table beside me. He told me about you once, a year before he died. Said you were wasting your brilliance trying to please a man who feared it. He made me promise that when you finally came back, I'd help you not because you'd need saving, but because you'd need someone who wouldn't try to cage you again. I looked up sharply. Is that why you've been helping me? Out of obligation? It started that way, he admitted. But it stopped being about Theodore weeks ago. His voice lowered. Now, I'm helping because I believe in you. Because you're the only person I've ever met who can rebuild an entire life from ashes and still make it beautiful. Something inside me cracked, not painfully this time, but like ice breaking to reveal water beneath. I wanted to tell him that for the first time, I felt whole. That his faith wasn't filling a void, it was meeting a strength I'd forgotten I had. Instead, I said, he left a part of himself everywhere in this place. The studio, the letters, even you. Maybe that's what real legacy is. It's not the buildings we leave behind, it's the people who keep building. Jacob smiled. And you're doing exactly that. I turned toward the window where the city stretched, alive and endless. The skyline shimmered like a promise, 100 towers catching the late afternoon light. Somewhere below, cars pulsed through streets. Theodore had once mapped on tracing paper. And I thought, maybe this was what he meant all along. That architecture wasn't about walls and roofs, it was about resurrection. Jacob's hand brushed mine, and I didn't pull away. His touch was steady, grounding. He'd be proud, he said quietly. I think, I whispered. He already knew I'd find my way back. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was thick with everything unspoken, the grief, the gratitude, the fragile, terrifying possibility of something new. Outside, the city lights began to flicker to life one by one, like blueprints illuminated in the dark. And for the first time since that day behind the dumpster, I felt certain I was exactly where I was meant to be. The next few weeks passed in a strange rhythm, part chaos, part creation. For the first time in years, my days were filled with purpose instead of survival. The office had changed since the board confrontation. The fear that once hung in every hallway was replaced by something lighter, sharper possibility. Jacob called it the rebuilding phase, but to me, it felt more like rebirth. Theodore's words from the journal followed me everywhere. You're not building structures, Sophia. You're building people. That idea became a heartbeat I couldn't ignore. One evening, as I sat alone in the studio surrounded by Theodore's sketches, I realized what I wanted to do with his legacy. Not just lead the company but open its doors to those who would never otherwise be allowed in. Young architects who couldn't afford unpaid internships or degrees that cost more than homes. People who saw beauty but never got a chance to design it. The next morning, I walked into Jacob's office with a stack of papers and a spark I hadn't felt in a decade. I have an idea, I told him. He raised an eyebrow, smiling. Should I be afraid? Only if you hate revolutions. I spread my proposal across his desk, a mentorship initiative that combined paid fellowships, real-world projects, and full creative participation. I called it the Hartfield Fellowship. It's expensive, Jacob said, scanning the plan. Ambitious, controversial. You're proposing to pay students nearly what junior architects make. Exactly, I said, because we don't pay potential with exposure. We pay it with opportunity. Theodore believed architecture was the art of giving people space to exist. This is how I give them that space. Jacob looked at me for a long time, then nodded. You realize this could change everything about how firms operate. Good, I said, let it. The board wasn't as easily convinced. Half the room stared like I'd proposed setting fire to the company bank account. Patricia Stevens, one of Theodore's oldest friends, spoke first. Miss Hartfield, she said carefully, your uncle valued innovation, but he also valued financial prudence. Why risk resources on inexperienced students? Because someone once risked them on me, I said. And because the next Theodore Hartfield might be sitting in a dorm room right now, unable to afford a train ticket to New York. If we can build cathedrals out of concrete and glass, surely we can build a bridge for talent. Silence followed. It wasn't resistance now, it was consideration. When the vote passed with a narrow margin, I exhaled so hard I nearly laughed. The Hartfield Fellowship launched 3 months later. We received hundreds of applications, portfolios sent from tiny towns, borrowed libraries, halfway across the world. The 12 who were chosen arrived in September, nervous, brilliant, and trembling with hunger for a chance. Emma Rodriguez, the youngest, barely 22, reminded me of myself at that age. Bright eyes, rough confidence, sketches filled with courage. She came from a working-class family in New Mexico and told me she'd applied without expecting a reply. "Architecture isn't exactly a realistic career where I'm from," she said shyly. "Then maybe we need to change what's realistic," I told her. The fellows worked inside the old model room Theodore had used for competitions. Every morning, I'd pass by and see them huddled around models, arguing about design choices, laughing over mistakes, sketching furiously. Their energy turned the entire firm electric. Some of the senior architects complained. "They're too green," one muttered during a project meeting. "You're wasting billable hours babysitting." I met his gaze. "No," I said. "I'm investing in the future of this company, and maybe in the future of architecture itself." Emma's first assignment was a small design challenge, a community shelter for low-income neighborhoods. 2 weeks later, she brought me sketches that stopped me cold. Her design incorporated rooftop gardens that grew food for residents and natural cooling systems that used airflow instead of electricity. It was raw but ingenious. I told her it was extraordinary. She cried right there in my office, not from weakness, but disbelief that someone finally saw her as enough. That night, I stayed late in the studio staring at her drawings. The lines were young but alive. I thought about Theodore again, about the way he'd built that fifth-floor studio 8 years before I was ready to return. Maybe he'd known I would do the same one day, but for others. A few weeks later, an email arrived that shifted everything. A nonprofit organization in Brooklyn had seen Emma's design and wanted to partner with Hartfield Architecture to build it with Emma as lead designer under our supervision. Jacob nearly dropped his coffee reading it. "They want her to lead? She's barely out of school." I smiled. So was I once. When I told Emma, she went completely still. "That can't be real." "It is," I said. "You're ready. We'll be beside you every step of the way." The next months were a blur of meetings, permits, and late nights. Emma handled every challenge with quiet brilliance, and by the time the foundation was poured, she was no longer a student, she was an architect. Watching her stand in a hard hat at the construction site, explaining her vision to engineers, I felt a surge of something between pride and peace. Jacob called it the full circle moment. The media caught on quickly. Articles about the Hartfield Fellowship appeared in architectural journals, framing it as a bold redefinition of mentorship. Some praised it. Others mocked it as a vanity project, a PR stunt by a sentimental CEO. I ignored them all, because I had seen what it did for Emma. But change never comes without resistance. A month later, a competitor named Marcus Chen, CEO of one of New York's largest firms, published an op-ed calling my program an exploitative marketing experiment. He implied that we used young talent for cheap labor, that I was romanticizing mentorship while profiting from it. Jacob read the article out loud in disbelief. "He's threatened. That's all this is." Maybe. But it still stung. For 2 days, I let it simmer. Then I sat down and wrote my own response, not defensive but deliberate. I titled it "Building Bridges: Why Architecture Needs New Voices." In it, I wrote, "The question isn't whether mentorship programs are exploitative. The question is whether the industry can evolve beyond nepotism. The next great architect shouldn't need to inherit a surname to inherit a future." When the article went live, it spread faster than I expected. Universities shared it, young architects sent letters, other firms began announcing their own mentorship programs. The noise Marcus had created turned into a movement he couldn't control. That night, Jacob looked at me across the conference table and smiled. "You realize what you've done?" I nodded. "Started a fire." He laughed softly. "The good kind." I thought about Theodore then, about the letter he'd left. "You'll either take the challenge or find your own path. Either way, you'll be free." He'd been right. I hadn't just taken his challenge. I'd turned it into something bigger than either of us. Outside, the skyline glowed gold against the dark. Somewhere below, the foundations of a shelter were being poured, the first of many. I stood by the window, feeling the hum of the city beneath my feet. For the first time, I wasn't just living his legacy. I was expanding it. The weeks after the fellowship's success felt almost unreal, the kind of calm that hums before another upheaval. The Brooklyn project was under construction, the firm was thriving, and for the first time since I'd inherited Hartfield architecture, I felt something dangerously close to peace. But peace never lasts long when the world is watching. It started with an email from a streaming network producer. The subject line was short: documentary proposal, The Woman Who Rebuilt. I nearly deleted it, assuming it was another interview request. But something about the phrasing made me open it. They wanted to film a feature-length documentary, part biography, part social study about architecture as transformation. They'd seen my article about mentorship, the fellowship's viral rise, and the Brooklyn project. "We think your story captures the intersection of art, resilience, and gender in leadership," the producer wrote. "We'd love to follow your journey for the next few months." I stared at the screen for a long time. The idea both thrilled and terrified me. Jacob found me in the studio that evening, still reading the proposal. He asked what was wrong, and I told him. "They want to make a film about me. About this," I said, gesturing around the space that had once been Theodore's and now felt like mine. His brow furrowed. "That's huge exposure, Sophia. But it also means giving the world a window into your life. Are you ready for that?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't want it to become sensational. This isn't about tragedy, it's about rebuilding." He leaned against the drafting table, watching me. "Then tell it your way. Control the story. Don't let them." I smiled faintly. "You sound like Theodore." "I'll take that as a compliment," he said. The film crew arrived 2 weeks later, polite, precise, respectful. They turned the studio into a quiet choreography of cameras and cables. For 2 months, they followed everything: the fellowship in action, the construction progress in Brooklyn, board meetings, design sessions, even quiet dinners with Jacob when the workday ended, and laughter felt easy again. They asked about my childhood, my uncle, the firm. But inevitably, they reached the part I'd hoped to keep locked away: Richard. The interviewer, a kind woman in her 40s, asked gently, "You mentioned resilience after loss. What exactly did you lose?" I took a breath and stared at the skyline beyond the window. "My sense of worth," I said finally. "For 10 years, I lived with someone who needed me small so he could feel big. I thought love meant shrinking to fit another person's comfort. I was wrong." She asked if I wanted to elaborate. I shook my head. "The specifics don't matter. What matters is that I survived, and that I built something beautiful from what he tried to break." They left it at that, and I was grateful. When the documentary premiered in August, I watched it alone in the estate's screening room, hands trembling. It was called Blueprints of Rebirth. The opening scene showed the Brooklyn shelter rising from its foundations, overlaid with my voice. Architecture isn't just about creating space, it's about reclaiming it for others, and for yourself. By the time the credits rolled, I was crying, not because it was sad, but because it was true. The response was overwhelming. The film went viral across platforms. Universities invited me to speak. Architecture schools added the fellowship to their case studies. My inbox flooded with letters from women, students, and even strangers who'd said my story made them feel seen. And then, inevitably, he called. The number flashed on my phone while I was at dinner with Jacob, unknown, but achingly familiar. Against every instinct, I answered. "Hello?" The silence on the other end stretched before a voice I hadn't heard in a year spoke. "Sophia." I froze. "Richard." "I saw the documentary," he said. "You made me look like a villain." I almost laughed. "I didn't mention your name once." "You didn't have to. Everyone knows." His tone sharpened, fragile and furious. "You're destroying my reputation." "I'm not destroying anything," I said evenly. "I just told my story. If you recognize yourself in it, maybe that says more about you than me." He raised his voice, but I stayed calm. Years ago, his anger would have made me shrink. Now, it only reminded me how far I'd climbed from that version of myself. "Richard," I said finally, "I haven't thought about you in months. You don't get to rewrite history just because the truth makes you uncomfortable. You don't exist in my story anymore." He went quiet. When he finally spoke, his voice was trembling. "You'll regret humiliating me." "No," I said softly. "I'll thank myself for ending it." Then I hung up. When I told Jacob later, he went completely still, then reached across the table and took my hand. "He's going to try to drag you back into his chaos," he said. "Let him try," I replied. "He doesn't realize I stopped living in his version of reality a long time ago." But Richard didn't stop. Within a week, he sent messages through mutual acquaintances, then through one of the fellowship's interns. Emma showed me the message, polite, manipulative, congratulatory. I told her to block him immediately. 2 days later, Victoria called, her voice tight. "He's threatening to sue Sophia. Claims the documentary damaged his reputation and your success was built using shared marital resources. It's nonsense, but he wants attention." I almost laughed. "He's suing me for becoming the person he said I'd never be." Jacob looked furious. "You can't ignore this. You'll need to fight it hard." "I will," I said. "But not just for me. For every woman who's ever been told she's lucky to be tolerated." The first hearing came in December. The courtroom was cold, formal, indifferent, a far cry from the chaos of my old life. Richard sat across the room, confident at first. His posture the same blend of arrogance and control I'd once mistaken for strength. His lawyer argued that I'd used knowledge, training, and resources gained during our marriage to build my current empire, that half of my success was technically his. Victoria rose, calm and unflinching. She presented the journals I'd kept during the marriage, showing how he'd sabotaged interviews, discouraged my license exam, erased my early designs. The evidence was devastating. When the judge spoke, his voice was dry and final. "Mr. Foster, it appears you're attempting to claim ownership of a career you spent years preventing your wife from pursuing. This court finds your claim both frivolous and vindictive. Motion dismissed with prejudice." Richard's expression cracked disbelief first, then rage, then something small and pathetic. Outside, reporters swarmed. Someone shouted, "Miss Hartfield, how do you feel about the verdict?" I looked straight into the cameras and said, "Vindicated. But more importantly, free." This isn't just a victory for me, it's for anyone who's ever been told they were nothing without the person who tried to break them. The clip went viral within hours. That night, back at the estate, I stood on the rooftop garden, the winter air biting but clean. Jacob joined me silently. We didn't need to talk. The city stretched beneath us alive, glittering, impossibly vast. I thought of Theodore then, of his steady belief that pain was just another form of raw material. You could build with it if you were brave enough. For a long moment, I just breathed, feeling the weight of the past dissolve into the night. Richard had tried to make me small again. Instead, he'd proven how far I'd risen. And as the cold air brushed my face, I realized something simple and perfect. The storm hadn't destroyed me. It had cleared the sky. Winter in New York has a way of slowing everything down, like the city itself is holding its breath. The snow that year fell early, thick, soft, almost cinematic, coating the Hartfield estate in white silence. From my office window, I watched flakes swirl past the glass and thought about how, somehow, after everything, peace had finally stopped feeling like a stranger. The lawsuit was behind me. The fellowship was thriving. The Brooklyn project had just opened its doors to the public, and the photos of families moving into the finished shelter had gone viral across the world. The headlines read, "The Hartfield vision comes to life." But for the first time, I didn't see it as his vision, or even mine. It belonged to all of us, who dared to build something out of nothing. Then came the letter. It arrived one Friday morning, delivered by courier, thick cream paper, embossed with a name I hadn't heard in years, the Ashcroft Group, one of the largest international architecture conglomerates in the world. I slit the envelope open carefully, half expecting a polite congratulations. Instead, it was an offer. They wanted to buy Hartfield Architecture, entirely. The sum was staggering enough to set me and every employee for life. The letter was cold, efficient, and unnervingly flattering. "We believe Hartfield's recent social innovation efforts have positioned it uniquely in the market. With our resources, your mission could expand globally." At the bottom, A handwritten note added, "Every architect must decide whether to build or to sell what they've built. Choose wisely." I read it 3 times before setting it down. That night, I called Jacob to the estate. Snow was falling in thick curtains outside, muting the city's sounds. We sat in the studio, the same room that had witnessed my failures, my rebirth, and every sleepless night in between. "They want to buy it," I said, sliding the letter toward him. He read in silence. "It's monumental," he finally said. "You could retire tomorrow, live anywhere, start anything. It's everything people dream of." "Maybe that's the problem," I replied. He looked up. "You're not tempted?" "I was," I admitted. For about 5 minutes. Then I thought of Theodore. He never built for money. He built because he couldn't imagine not building. Jacob leaned back, studying me. "Then maybe this is the final test he meant for you." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He gestured to the letter. "Legacy isn't just what we create, it's what we choose to protect. Selling this would make you rich. Keeping it might make you immortal." The words hit me harder than I expected, because deep down, I knew he was right. For days, I couldn't sleep. The letter stayed on my desk like a quiet dare. Every night, I walked through the empty halls of the estate, tracing my uncle's old designs, rereading his journal, listening for his voice in the silence. On the third night, I opened one of the final pages again. The handwriting was faint but clear. "Sophia will face a choice one day between permanence and purpose. If she remembers why she started, she'll choose correctly." That was all it said. No advice, no persuasion, just faith. I closed the journal and whispered into the quiet room. "You already knew I'd doubt myself, didn't you?" The snow outside caught the moonlight and shimmered like scattered paper. The next morning, I gathered the board in the main conference room, the same one where Carmichael had once tried to humiliate me. Now, sunlight poured through the tall windows, illuminating the table like an altar. "I've received an offer from Ashcroft Group," I began. The room went still. "They want to acquire Hartfield in full." Several members gasped. Patricia Stevens leaned forward. "My God, Sophia. That's history-making. Do you plan to accept?" I shook my head slowly. "No." Before they could respond, I continued. "Because Hartfield was never meant to be a product. It's a promise, and promises can't be sold." I let the silence settle. When Theodore built this firm, he didn't do it to compete. He did it to contribute. Selling it might multiply our reach, but it would dilute our purpose. This isn't about how much we can earn, it's about what we can still change. I paused, meeting each of their eyes. "If any of you disagree, I won't hold it against you. But if you stay for the mission, not the money." Patricia was the first to speak. "Your uncle would have been proud." One by one, the rest nodded. Even those I hadn't expected to. The vote was unanimous. Hartfield Architecture would remain independent. A week later, the official announcement went public. Hartfield rejects global buyout to preserve mission. The article went viral within hours, igniting debates across the design world. Some called it reckless, others called it revolutionary. Jacob found me that evening standing in front of the estate's fireplace, staring into the flames. "You did it," he said softly. "You passed his test." I smiled faintly. It never felt like a test, more like a mirror. He stepped closer. "So what now?" "Now," I said, "we expand but on our own terms. The fellowship becomes international. Partnerships with universities, community projects, architectural education for those who've never seen the inside of a design studio. We make Hartfield not just a firm but a movement." Jacob's smile was slow, warm. "And you'll lead it." I turned toward him, the firelight dancing across the walls. "No," I said. "We'll lead it." That night, long after everyone had gone, I went up to the rooftop terrace alone. The city glittered below like a field of stars turned upside down. The snow had stopped, leaving everything washed and still. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who'd stood behind a convenience store dumpster with trembling hands, wondering if her life was over. I thought about the woman who'd walked into that boardroom with nothing but a whiteboard and courage. And I thought about the man who had believed in me long before I believed in myself. Theodore had built his legacy from steel and vision. I had rebuilt mine from silence and scars. As I looked out over the skyline, I realized that the true inheritance wasn't the company, or the estate, or even the empire he'd left behind. It was the courage to begin again endlessly, fearlessly, without permission. Somewhere, deep in the city, a church bell rang. I smiled, whispering into the cold air. "We did it, Uncle. It's finally alive again." And for the first time in a very long time, I felt complete. The next morning, Emma sent me a photo from the Brooklyn shelter. A small child stood in the courtyard beneath the glass canopy, snowflakes falling softly onto her open hands. The caption read, "They said this place feels like sunlight." I looked at the photo for a long time. Then I turned back to my drafting table, opened a new page, and drew. Because some legacies aren't meant to end. They're meant to keep building.